A Father's Story. My name is Luke Ripley, and here is what I call my life. I own a stable of 30 horses, and I have young people who teach riding, and we board some horses too. This is in northeastern Massachusetts. I have a barn with an indoor ring, and outside I've got 2 fenced-in rings, and a pasture that ends at a woods with trails. I call it my life because it looks like it is, and people I know call it that, but it's a life I can get away from when I hunt and fish, and some nights after dinner when I sit in the dark in the front room and listen to opera. The room faces the lawn and the road, a 2-lane country road. When cars come around the curve northwest of the house, they light up the lawn for an instant, the leaves of the maple out by the road and the hemlock closer to the window. Then I'm alone again, or I'd appear to be if someone crept up to the house and looked through a window. A big gutted, gray-haired guy, drinking tea and smoking cigarettes, staring out at the dark woods across the road, listening to a grieving soprano. My real life is the one nobody talks about anymore, except Father Paul LaBeouf, another old buck. He has a decade on me. He's 64, a big man, bald on top with gray at the sides. When he had hair, it was black. His face is ruddy, and he jokes about being a whiskey priest, though he's not. He gets outdoors as much as he can, goes for a long walk every morning, and hunts and fishes with me. But I can't get him on a horse anymore. 10 years ago, I could badger him into a trail ride. I had to give him a western saddle, and he'd hold the pommel and bounce through the woods with me, and be sore for days. He's looking at 70, with eyes that are younger than many I've seen in people in their 20s. I do not remember ever feeling the way they seem to, but I was lucky, because even as a child I knew that life would try me. And I must be strong to endure, though in those early days I expected to be tortured and killed for my faith, like the saints I learned about in school. Father Paul's family came down from Canada, and he grew up speaking more French than English, so he is different from the Irish priests who abound up here. I do not like to make general statements, or even to hold general beliefs about people's blood, but the Irish do seem happiest when they're dealing with misfortune or guilt, either their own or somebody else's, and if you think you're not a victim of either one, you can count on certain Irish priests to try to change your mind. On Wednesday nights, Father Paul comes to dinner. Often he comes on other nights too, and once, in the old days, when we couldn't eat meat on Fridays, we bagged our first ducks of the season on a Friday, and as we drove home from the marsh, he said, "For the purposes of Holy Mother Church, I believe a duck is more a creature of water than land, and is not rightly meat." Sometimes he teases me about never putting anything in his Sunday collection, which he would not know about if I hadn't told him years ago. I would like to believe I told him so we could have philosophical talk at dinner, but probably the truth is I suspected he knew, and I did not want him to think I so loved money that I would not even give his church a coin on Sunday. Certainly the ushers who pass the baskets know me as a miser. I don't feel right about giving money for buildings, places. This starts with the Pope, and I cannot respect one of them till he sells his house and everything in it, and that church too, and uses the money to feed the poor. I have rarely, and maybe never, come across saintliness, but I feel certain it cannot exist in such a place. But I admit, also, that I know very little, and maybe the popes live on a different plane, and are tried in ways I don't know about. Father Paul says his own church, St. John's, is hardly the Vatican. I like his church. It is made of wood, and has a simple altar, and crucifix, and no padding on the kneelers. He does not have to lock its doors at night. Still it is a place. He could say Mass in my barn. I know this is stubborn, but I can find no mention by Christ of maintaining buildings, much less erecting them of stone or brick, and decorating them with pieces of metal and mineral and elements that people still fight over like barbarians. We had a Maltese woman taking riding lessons. She came over on the boat when she was 10, and once she told me how the nuns in Malta used to tell the little girls that if they wore jewelry, rings and bracelets, and necklaces in purgatory, snakes would coil around their fingers and wrists and throats. I do not believe in frightening children or telling them lies, but if those nuns saved a few girls from devotion to things, maybe they were right. That Maltese woman laughed about it, but I noticed she wore only a watch, and that with a leather strap. The money I give to the church goes in people's stomachs and on their backs, down in New York City. I have no delusions about the worth of what I do, but I feel it's better to feed somebody than not. There's a priest in Times Square giving shelter to runaway kids, and some Franciscans who run a bread line. Actually, it's a morning line for coffee and a roll, and Father Paul calls it the continental breakfast for winos and bag ladies. He is curious about how much I am sending, and I know why. He guesses I send a lot. He has said probably more than tithing, and he is right. He wants to know how much because he believes I'm generous and good, and he is wrong about that. He has never had much money and does not know how easy it is to write a check when you have everything you will ever need, and the figures are mere numbers and represent no sacrifice at all. Being a real Catholic is too hard. If I were one, I would do with my house and barn what I want the Pope to do with his. So I do not want to impress Father Paul, and when he asks me how much, I say I can't let my left hand know what my right is doing. He came on Wednesday nights when Gloria and I were married, and the kids were young. Gloria was a very good cook. I assume she still is, but it is difficult to think of her in the present, and I liked sitting at the table with a friend who was also a priest. I was proud of my handsome and healthy children. This was long ago, and they were all very young and cheerful, and often funny, and the 3 boys took care of their baby sister, and did not bully or tease her. Of course they did sometimes, with that excited cruelty children are prone to, but not enough so that it was part of her days. On Wednesday after Gloria left with the kids and a U-Haul trailer, I was sitting on the front steps. It was summer, and I was watching cars go by on the road when Father Paul drove around the curve and into the driveway. I was ashamed to see him, because he is a priest, and my family was gone, but I was relieved too. I went to the car to greet him. He got out smiling, with a bottle of wine, shook my hand, then pulled me to him, gave me a quick hug, and said, "It's Wednesday, isn't it? Let's open some cans." With arms about each other, we walked to the house, and it was good to know he was doing his work, but coming as a friend too, and I thought what good work he had. I have no calling. It is for me to keep horses. In that other life, anyway. In my real one, I go to bed early and sleep well and wake at 4:45 for an hour of silence. I never want to get out of bed then, and every morning I know I can sleep for another 4 hours, and still not fail at any of my duties. But I get up. So have come to believe my life can be seen in miniature, in that struggle, in the dark of morning. While making the bed and boiling water for coffee, I talk to God. I offer him my day, every act of my body and spirit, my thoughts and moods, as a prayer of thanksgiving, and for Gloria and my children, and my friends and 2 women I made love with after Gloria left. This morning offertory is a habit from my boyhood in a Catholic school, or then it was a habit, but as I kept it and grew older it became a ritual. Then I say the Lord's Prayer, trying not to recite it, and one morning it occurred to me that a prayer, whether recited or said with concentration, is always an act of faith. I sit in the kitchen at the rear of the house and drink coffee and smoke, and watch the sky growing light before sunrise, the trees of the woods near the barn taking shape, becoming single pines and elms, and oaks and maples. Sometimes a rabbit comes out of the tree-line, or is already sitting there, invisible till the light finds him. The birds are awake in the trees and feeding on the ground, and the little ones, the purple finches and titmice and chickadees, are at the feeder I rigged outside the kitchen window. It is too small for pigeons to get a purchase. I sit and give myself to coffee and tobacco that get me brisk again, and I watch and listen. In the first year or so after I lost my family, I played the radio in the mornings. But I overcame that, and now I rarely play it at all. Once in the mail, I received a questionnaire asking me to write down everything I watched on television during the week they had chosen. At the end of those 7 days I wrote in The Wizard of Oz and returned it. That was in the winter, and was actually a busy week for my television, which normally sits out the cold months without once warming up. Had they sent the questionnaire during baseball season, they would have found me at my set. People at the stables talk about shows and performers I have never heard of, but I cannot get interested. When I am in the mood to watch television, I go to a movie or read a detective novel. There are always good detective novels to be found, and I like remembering them next morning with my coffee. I also think of baseball and hunting and fishing and of my children. It is not painful to think about them anymore, because even if we had lived together, they would be gone now, grown into their own lives, except Jennifer. I think of death too, not sadly, or with fear, though something like excitement does run through me, something more quickening than the coffee and tobacco. I suppose it is an intense interest and an outright distrust. I never feel certain that I'll be here watching birds eating at tomorrow's daylight. Sometimes I try to think of other things, like the rabbit that is warm and breathing, but not there till twilight. I feel on the brink of something about the life of the senses, but either am not equipped to go further or am not interested enough to concentrate. I have called all of this thinking, but it is not, because it is unintentional. What I'm really doing is feeling the day in silence, and that is what Father Paul is doing, too, on his 5 to 10 mile walks. When the hour ends, I take an apple or carrot, and I go to the stable and tack up a horse. We take good care of these horses, and no one rides them but students, instructors, and me, and nobody rides the horses we board, unless an owner asks me to. The barn is dark, and I turn on lights and take some deep breaths, smelling the hay and horses and their manure, both fresh and dried, a combined odor that you either like or you don't. I walk down the wide space of dirt between stalls, greeting the horses, joking with them about their quirks, and choose one, for no reason at all, other than the way it looks at me that morning. I get my Old English saddle that has smoothed and darkened through the years, and go into the stall, talking to this beautiful creature who'll swerve out of a canter if a piece of paper blows in front of him. And if the barn catches fire and you manage to get him out, he will, if he can get away from you, run back into the fire to his stall. Like the smells that surround them, you either like them or you don't. I love them, so am spared having to try to explain why. I feed one the carrot or apple and tack up and lead him outside, where I mount, and we go down the driveway to the road, and cross it and turn northwest and walk, then trot, then canter to St. John's. A few cars are on the road, their drivers looking serious about going to work. It is always strange for me to see a woman dressed for work so early in the morning. You know how long it takes them with the makeup and hair and clothes. And I think of them waking in the dark of winter or early light of other seasons, and dressing as they might for an evening's entertainment. Probably this strikes me because I grew up seeing my father put on those suits he never wore on weekends or his 2 weeks off, and so am accustomed to the men, but when I see these women I think something went wrong. To send all those dressed up people out on the road when the dew hasn't dried yet. Maybe it's because I so dislike getting up early, but am also doing what I choose to do while they have no choice. At heart I am lazy, yet I find such peace and delight in it that I believe it is a natural state, and in what looks like my laziest periods, I am closest to my center. The ride to St. John's is 15 minutes. The horses and I do it in all weather. The road is well plowed in winter, and there are only a few days a year when ice makes me drive the pickup. People always look at someone on horseback, and for a moment their faces change, and many drivers and I wave to each other. Then at St. John's, Father Paul and 5 or 6 regulars, and I celebrate the Massachusetts. Do not think of me as a spiritual man whose every thought during those 25 minutes is at one with the words of the Massachusetts. Each morning I try, each morning I fail, and know that always I will be a creature who, looking at Father Paul and the altar, and uttering prayers, will be distracted by scrambled eggs, horses, the weather, and memories and daydreams that have nothing to do with the sacrament I am about to receive. I can receive, though, the Eucharist, and also, at Mass and at other times, moments, and even minutes of contemplation. But I cannot achieve contemplation as some can, and so, having to face and forgive my own failures, I have learned from them both the necessity and wonder of ritual. For ritual allows those who cannot will themselves out of the secular to perform the spiritual, as dancing allows the tongue-tied man a ceremony of love. And, while my mind dwells on breakfast, or major or duchess, tethered under the church eve, there is, as I take the host from Father Paul and place it on my tongue and return to the pew, a feeling that I am thankful I have not lost in the 48 years since my first communion. At its center is excitement, spreading out from it is the peace of certainty, or the certainty of peace. One night Father Paul and I talked about faith. It was long ago, and all I remember is him saying, belief is believing in God, faith is believing that God believes in you. That is the excitement and the peace. Then the Mass is over, and I go into the sacristy and we have a cigarette and chat. The mystery ends. We are 2 men talking, like any 2 men, on a morning in America, about baseball, plane crashes, presidents, governors, murders, the sun, the clouds. Then I go to the horse, and ride back to the life people see, the one in which I move and talk, and most days I enjoy it. It is late summer now, the time between fishing and hunting, but a good time for baseball. It has been 2 weeks since Jennifer left to drive home to Gloria's after her summer visit. She is the only one who still visits. The boys are married and have children, and sometimes fly up for a holiday, or I fly down or west to visit one of them. Jennifer is 20, and I worry about her the way fathers worry about daughters but not sons. I want to know what she's up to, and at the same time, I don't. She looks athletic, and she swims and runs, and of course rides. All my children do. When she comes, for 6 weeks in summer, the house is loud with girls, friends of hers, since childhood, and new ones. I am glad she kept the girl friends. They have been young, company for me, and, being with them, I have been able to gauge her growth between summers. On their riding days, I'd take them back to the house when their lessons were over and they had walked the horses and put them back in the stalls, and we'd have lemonade or Coke and cookies if I had some, and talk until their parents came to drive them home. One year their breasts grew, so I wasn't startled when I saw Jennifer in July. Then they were driving cars to the stable and beginning to look like young women, and I was passing out beer in ashtrays and they were talking about college. When Jennifer was here in the summer, they were at the house most days. I would say generally that as they got older they became quieter, and though I enjoyed both, I sometimes missed the giggles and shouts. The quiet voices, just low enough for me not to hear, from wherever I was, rising and falling in proportion to my distance from them, frightened me. Not that I believed they were planning or recounting anything really wicked, but there was a female seriousness about them, and it was secretive, and of course I thought, love, sex. But it was more than that. It was womanhood. They were entering the deep forest of it, and no matter how many women and men too are saying these days that there is little difference between us, the truth is that men find their way into that forest only on clearly marked trails, while women move about in it like birds. So hearing Jennifer and her friends talking so quietly yet intensely, I wanted very much to have a wife. But not as much as in the old days when Gloria had left, but her presence was still in the house as strongly as if she had only gone to visit her folks for a week. There were no clothes or cosmetics, but potted plants endured my neglectful care as long as they could, and slowly died. I did not kill them on purpose to exorcise the house of her, but I could not remember to water them for weeks, because I did not use it much. The house was as neat as she had kept it, though dust layered the orders she had made. The kitchen went first. I got the dishes in and out of the dishwasher, and wiped the top of the stove, but did not return cooking spoons and pot holders to their hooks on the wall. And soon the burners and oven were caked with spillings. The refrigerator had more space and was spotted with juices. The living room and my bedroom went next. I did not go into the children's rooms except on bad nights when I went from room to room and looked and touched and smelled, so they did not lose their order until a year later when the kids came for 6 weeks. It was 3 months before I ate the last of the food Gloria had cooked and frozen. I remember it was a beef stew, and very good. By then I had 4 cookbooks, and was boasting a bit, and talking about recipes with the women at the stables, and looking forward to cooking for Father Paul. But I never looked forward to cooking at night only for myself, though I made myself do it.